So I've chosen to put my vanishing point right here. And if you think about it ahead of time, I'm going to see, I'll see the tops of these cubes here, and I will see the underside of the cubes here. I will also see the left side of these cubes on this side of the vanishing point. And then on this side of the vanishing point, I will see the right face of the right sides of those cubes there. The other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to start this whole exercise. I'm going to extrude using this square because it is the furthest away from the vanishing point. And the further away your object is from the vanishing point, the more of a chance there is for it to be out of visual acuity and it will end up distorted. So if you get this square, or the square that's the furthest away from your vanishing point, correct in terms of assessing its depth, then you're good for the rest of those squares, which will eventually become cubes, because it's this depth that will then set up the depth for the rest of your objects. And I'll give you a for instance. So let's go. Let's now just draw vanishing points. We'll extrude vanishing points toward each of these corners here of that square. So very, very lightly, and this is again that practice where you're going to draw toward yourself in a particular direction. And one more time here, I'm going very, very lightly to begin with. And now this last one. So toward yourself. And it's now looking like this. If you need to darken these lines up, by all means. All right, this is kind of exciting because you've got an initial start now to that perspective. Okay, let's take a look at what happens here. I've got these lines that are going off in the direction of that vanishing point. And now what I have to do is assess the depth of this cube. And this is where your eyeball is really going to come into play. So in other words, if we decide that, yep, I think that that's the depth of my cube, well, watch what happens when you bring it down like so. This is feeling way too deep. So instead what we want to do is bring it down to a measure that we're comfortable with, that still feels like a cube. And you know what, for me that's feeling pretty good. I might be able to take it a little bit further. I might be able to stretch it out to there, but you will know exactly when you've gone too far and you've pushed it just a little bit too far. So establish your first depth on this and you'll see how it will carry to the rest of them. So I'm pretty comfortable. I'm going to make it probably close to about here as the depth of that cube, and very lightly for now. This vertical line I drew is it's really key that it remains parallel to that front face. There's a tendency sometimes to want to kind of swoop it out, but make sure it's nice and parallel to this face. Turn your drawing toward yourself and again draw it parallel to the top of that square that you previously drew. And hopefully this feels like a cube because it's going to have an influence on the rest of these cubes. And I'll show you, I'll do the cubes across here and then the cubes across there. And I'm lightly going to darken it so that it still reads as a three-dimensional object. All right, so let's now extrude this square here. So I'll extrude any of those faces that will be visible, and very light. I'm not too concerned that these are, now I'm way off there, so I'm just going to redraw that line. I won't erase it quite yet. And I keep drawing toward it until I actually get it. So I've extruded from the exact same vanishing point. I still have one more corner here. This one might be a little bit more difficult because it's so foreshortened, but I'm aiming toward it. And you want to make sure that your lines are nice and straight. Okay, so back to the tracing paper. And here was that first cube, and I'll erase this so we don't get confused. Now, you don't have to guess on this one. You don't have to guess the depth on where it goes because what we're going to do is just take that alignment all the way across. So here is the depth I established for this cube. I just transfer that information to that cube there. So as you can see, I just transfer that dimension. I can see my pencil, my line just eked up a little bit. And to keep it as straight as possible, I'm going to turn my paper toward myself, and I'm now representing the back of the cube beside the initial one. And I did not have to guess. So I'm just going to darken those lines there. I'm now going to draw straight down, as straight as possible, and that will be the bottom of that cube over there. Here's a test. Let's see if this lines up with this one over here, and it should, because these are all the same depth. And I'm just going to correct some lines because I can see myself being tempted to not draw it straight across there, like so. And I'm not worried about making it in good yet at all. So let's just test to see if those line up. And very careful parallel lines, and yes they do. And in fact, let's see if this lines up with the bottom here, and you know that we can't see underside here, but these should all line up as well. These would be dashed lines because they're hidden from view, and these should all line up as well. The same thing will go across for this one. So you've already established the depth here, and we can extrude now from that corner, and now this corner, and this corner here. I'm being very mindful as I draw to make sure that they are nice and straight. And now what I'm going to do is transfer that information across to the top over here, to this guy. So transferring this information as controlled as I can to the perspective, and that now is the depth of the cube on the far left side. And I can see that I need some correction here, and I will just straighten that out because that little bit even has an influence on how we perceive it to be true or not. So keep in mind it did hit right there, going back to that line, and now I just draw straight down, as straight as possible, parallel until I reach that point right there. And again, these should all be in alignment as well, and we're pretty close. So you can see my cube starting to establish, and that was just based on this one cube. This one cube is going to tell the story for the rest of them, so including this column of squares right here. So again, I'm going to extrude back to the vanishing point, or toward the object from the vanishing point, and I'll just keep drawing that line until I get it right, but because I'm going lightly it doesn't matter. And this one here, and now this last corner. And you can see this exercise so much is, you know, it's about perspective, it's about using your sensibility about a cube, it's about freehand lines, it's about all kinds of things. So we've already established the depth here as well. This line back in here, when we said this is how deep our initial cube is going to be, that means that this now transfers up to, let's draw a little straighter here, this one transfers up to there. So if this is the depth down below, then that will transfer up to this line right here. So I can continue drawing in a little bit darker and parallel to this edge right here. This is now the established depth for the cube directly above it. And I have the where that met that extruded vanished line, I just draw a parallel line across here. And now this represents the back of the cube just above that lower one. So I think you're kind of getting the gist of how this is all working. And it's just a matter of transferring this information across to each of these. So I've done my 4, and I will now carry across, but again, consistently using the measurements I've already established.